Wait till we get there.
Barney,
Yeah.
look at that funny little truck.
Yeah. Cute, huh?
Oh, it's coming.
God of the seasons and sky, you have always been holding my life. And Lord, you are the shepherd of my soul. So I lay down my plans, I give up my rights, let you take control of this surrendered life. So I put my trust in the one who created the stars and the sun. Oh, you are eternally kind, always faithful and endlessly wise. Lord, you are the shepherd of my soul. So I lay down my plans, I give up my rights, let you take control of this surrendered life. And Lord, you are the shepherd of my soul. So I lay down my plans, I give up my rights, and let you take control of the surrendered life. You comfort, you sustain, in shaking you remain, unmoved and unafraid, forever and always you lead me, by still waters lead me, through the valleys lead me, in your wisdom shepherd of my soul. You comfort, you sustain, in shaking you remain, unmoved and unafraid, forever and always you lead me, by still waters lead me, through the valleys lead me, in your wisdom shepherd of my soul.
check.
Thank you. Okay.
Check.
Check. Testing. There we go. Awesome. Hey, good morning, everybody. Bright and early. Thanks for making the trek over to the student building. We're so grateful to have you. My name is Jason Johnson. I have the privilege of serving on the CAFO staff. This is my friend Tiffany, and she is the executive director of a very large bridge organization in the greater Sacramento area. And so together, she and I this morning are just going to have a conversation with you all. And I want to set realistic expectations. The first being, we won't be able to solve all the problems and answer every question. I know, you're like, forget it. Let's go to Starbucks, right? The second is, we kind of hope that you actually leave here perhaps asking a different set of questions, new questions that you go back to your team, the people that you work with, that you begin to explore and dive in deeper together. And then our promise to you is this: we want to help you along the way. And so our commitment to you is to walk with you, to Zoom with you, to be on phone calls with you, to help answer questions along the way, and we'll figure things out. No one's an expert at this. We're all kind of making some things up as we go, and so let's build the plane while we're flying it, and let's help each other and walk together. That's really the heart of the CAFO community. So we're grateful that you're here. I want to point out a couple of things before we get started. You might see on your table a flyer about a new resource that we've just put out. And I checked the bookstore last night. They are gone. So they are available on Amazon, and we are getting some more printed. But this is what it looks like. It's a real short booklet, 4 principles to help your organization's church engagement strategy thrive. That's really going to be kind of the outline that we follow here this morning. We won't cover every detail in this little booklet, but we will kind of cover the highlights. And so I encourage you to check that out. You can get it on Amazon. And this will be the first of many resources to begin to come out of the CAFO community. And so in large part, my role at CAFO since I came on about 6 years ago, has been direct interface with churches, helping churches think through how they are going to strategically set up ministries that care for vulnerable children and families. What that looks like, best practices, leaning into people like Tiffany who are working with churches in her community and learning and grabbing information that we can then disseminate out into the CAFO community. My role is significantly shifting away from directly interfacing with churches to now directly interfacing with organizations that interface with churches, if that makes sense. And so if we really want to begin to pursue more than enough, then we're going to have to change some systems. And one of those systems is we want to see more than enough churches caring for vulnerable children and families. And so a decision that we have to make is we can spend an hour with one church, and it can be wonderful and beautiful. Or I can spend an hour with you that represent 20, 30, 50, 100 church potential partners in your community, and that might be about an hour better spent in terms of efficiency and scale for us to really see the church mobilize. So you are going to begin to see more opportunities and resources come out. This is where it fits into, I did it already. Kim, here we go. This is where it fits into kind of the more than enough vision. If you've seen this diagram perhaps in other workshops, we won't unpack the whole thing, but really the root element is how we are collaborating together. And then the trunk is communication support, church engagement support, fundraising support, data and technology. And ultimately the fruit that we want to see is more than enough for families, more than enough for kids, more than enough for kinship, more than enough for biological families. And so where we are focusing our time here this morning is on that church engagement support. So you'll see there the booklet, and we want to make sure that you know that's available. So let's dive in. We've got a lot to get through, and I'm going to kind of focus on some principles and some ideas, and then Tiffany's going to come land the plane, clean up what I say, and give some practicals. Like, this is what it's been looking like for us on the ground, and you'll probably be able to relate to much of what she has to say. When we talk about being a good guide, the 3 questions that really drive us are this: who is the guide, who is the main character, and what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Who is the guide, who is the main character, and what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Now, traditionally in our nonprofit to church relations world, it's operated something like this. The main character has been the organization, and the guide has been the church. And so to a certain degree, our approach has been something like this: hi, church, we're trying to solve a problem, and we need your fill in the blank to help us do that. We need your money, your people, your stage, everything that you can possibly give us, right? What do you have that we can use to help us solve the problem that we're trying to solve? Now, that's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it gets us so far in terms of using the church as a commodity rather than using our organization as a commodity and a resource for the church. And so what we're proposing and what we're seeing is a shift in posture in terms of how we even begin to approach churches. And it's a flipping of who is the main character in this story and who is the guide. Ultimately, we believe that as organizations, we operate in that guide role, and the main character is the church. I will never forget several years ago helping a global organization that runs child sponsorship programs kind of coordinate vision trips to take pastors over to see their work on the ground. And the thing that struck me the most about this particular organization is that we would go into these communities, rural communities, where many of you have been in these environments where you feel like I am literally in the middle of nowhere. How did I end up here? And then, whoa, there's 500 kids, right? All of a sudden. And there's a church and there's a community. And I was struck by the fact that as we entered into these communities, there was zero evidence that this particular missions organization even existed. It was all about that local church and that community. Now, it took us, once we got into the back offices and we saw the information that the leaders within that church, then we saw some of the resources that organization was providing for that church. But what struck me most is as we entered, there was no banner with that organization's name. There was no one standing out front passing out flyers about the history of that organization. It was all about setting that local church up as the main character in that community. And that's really our posture. And so our language begins to shift. Hi, church. Our organization exists to help your church provide clear pathways for people to effectively care for vulnerable people and children. And so here's how it breaks down. Our organization exists to help your church. We're establishing ourselves as the guide. That's what we do. Now, a lot of churches have heard that many times over the years, and they've heard that pitch. And then in practicals, in terms of the relationship, they've seen it actually not play out that way. And so I think there's a burden on us to approach churches as the guide and say, we are here to serve and support you. And maybe not say these words, but understand in our own hearts, we have to prove that to them. We have to establish proof of concept, so that they understand this isn't just a bait and switch. This isn't just a hook to get in the door. We exist to serve you, establishing ourselves as the guide, then rooting out the problem to provide clear pathways for you, or whatever your language might be. And here's the purpose, here's the point there, is that our organization has a problem to solve, and it's an important one. And that's why we're all here, because we collectively agree this is an important problem for us to be solving. But as we engage churches that might not be as aware of the problem, they're not as in tune with our problem as we are. And so our problem might not be their problem in that moment. And so we come to them with, here's the problem that we need you to help us solve. And as we approach them with that problem, it presents a whole set of problems for them. Problems like, we don't understand what that means. We're afraid of what that looks like for our church to really begin to step into some hard places. I'm a pastor, and I don't feel like I have the confidence I need to stand in front of our people and present this clearly to them. That's a problem for me. Okay, so you're inviting us to engage in foster care. Well, a problem for us is when we do that, we understand that families are going to bring children into their homes, and they're going to bring them into our church, and they're going to bring them into our children's ministry, and we're not sure if we've got systems in place to really handle the unique situations in my rights. That's a problem for us. And so we begin to see that we now have two entirely different sets of problems. And traditionally, the nonprofit approach has been, we have a problem, and we need your stuff to help us solve it. And now our new approach is we understand that there are some problems that you might encounter that we are here to help you overcome. You're the main character in this story. Your people, this reinforces the church as the main character, not our people. Not long ago, I was with an organization, a fantastic agency, and we were looking at their website, and we noticed that their audience was the church and their community. And yet the website was talking about families, and they were saying our families. Our families are supported. Our families are cared for. Our families are well-trained. And I thought, you're communicating to the church, but you're telling the church these are our families as an organization. Let's add a Y in front of all of those ours, all through your website. Hey, church, these are your families. And your families will be cared for. Your families will be supported. Your families will be trained as you partner with us. because you're the main character in this story. And our job is to help you be the best version of your church that you can be. Effectively care for vulnerable children and families in your community. This might not be your language, but scripting a happy ending story in partnership with us, this is what we're aspirationally moving towards. This is what it can look like. As we help you navigate through some of the road bumps and the speed bumps and the problems that you might encounter, this is what we're moving towards together, a happy ending story, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Let's talk about features and benefits here very quickly. Features are things like, hey, here's all the different ways that your church can get involved with us. Here's a litany of our programs that we have available for you. Now, features are good, but perhaps features at times can also be overwhelming. As we present a litany of programs that churches can get involved in, the question then becomes, is that actually helping to solve the problem that they're encountering? Maybe it's a lack of clarity, or it's a sense of already feeling overwhelmed, and now you've just thrown 17 programs that you run at me, and we go, I don't even know where to start with that. And so some of our approach can begin to shift away from projecting features first and talking about benefits. Benefits of what it has looked like for other churches to partner with our organization, how we've helped other churches overcome some of the problems that they've encountered, and what that happy ending story has looked like for them. Here's how we will help you solve the problem. Features and benefits. And again, this is high level. A lot of this is in the booklet, but we've got a lot to get through. So we're a fire hydrant, and then Tiffany's going to clean it all up, right? That's the goal. But just be thinking through, looking at collateral material and just doing an honest assessment. As it stands right now, in our communication, in our website, in our collateral material, what are we leading with? Are we leading with us as the main character or the church? What are we leading with? Are we leading with a litany of all the programs that we have that you can get involved in that might actually perpetuate the problem of feeling a little bit overwhelmed and the lack of clarity? Or are we leading with stories of benefits? This is what it can look like to partner with us as we can help you overcome problems that you might encounter. And this leads into this idea of establishing credibility. A couple of different components of establishing credibility. The first is communicating empathy. Hey, we understand where you are. We've been there before. We get it. And we've seen many others experience the same things that you have. So as a former pastor sitting in that seat, if someone were to come to me and say, so as a matter of fact, this organization that I traveled with and I helped form vision trips for, they approached us as a young church plant. And their language to us was, hey, we get it. We get what it's like to be in a church plant. It's hard. We know that you don't have the funds, you don't have the capacity yet to really kind of hire out a missions arm to your team and to your church, but we also know that you care about missions. And so let us be your missions pastor for a while. I went, yes. Right? I don't even know what you do, but yes, right? It was this, I didn't know fully all the features that they had, but I understood the benefits of an organization like that coming to me and saying, hey, we get it. We understand where you're at. And so let us help you. That's the idea of empathy plus authority. Authority says we've worked with other people just like you, and we have resources that you need, and we've helped others just like you kind of overcome the problems that they've encountered and grow in their ministry. And this idea of empathy plus authority really establishes credibility for potential new church partners. An idea here is, let's say it this way. Looking at your collateral material and the stories that you're sharing and the testimonies that you're getting from other churches. It's one thing for a church to say, hey, they're really great to work with. It's another thing for a church testimony to say, you know what? Here's where we were, and here's the problems that we were encountering, and here's how XYZ organization helped us overcome those problems and land in a place of ministry where we're really seeing beautiful fruit happen. Okay? If I'm a church leader that's looking to potentially partner with you and I'm hearing those kinds of credible stories from other churches and they've experienced the benefits of partnering with you, then I say, yes, I can relate to that. They can help us overcome some of the questions and problems and speed bumps that we're currently encountering. So, Tiffany, how have you seen some of these things play out in your work with churches in the greater Sacramento area and even beyond that as well?
Absolutely. I love this booklet. I love it. I got to read a digital copy as we were preparing for this presentation, and so I highly recommend getting this because Jason made things so clear. And it's really fun to get to present with him because do any of you like football or baseball? Football and okay, so you know that there's two commentators, right? Like there's the stats person and the color commentator. So I get to be your color commentator because I'm going to just highlight some of the things I've seen in churches in my area and some of the things that my Bridge organization does that exemplify all four of these things we're talking about this morning. And so being a good guide is exactly what he said. We have to come in looking to serve them, not asking them to serve us or even serve the people that we serve. We don't normally think that they're serving our organization, right? Our stories are literally serve the foster kids that we care for, serve the vulnerable families, serve the single moms in crisis. We're highlighting the population, but we missed the fact that those same people exist in their congregations. And so the thing that I tend to do is find out who I'm meeting with. If I get a yes to an email or a phone call or a text, or I get that personal introduction, which are, those are gold when you get the personal introduction to somebody at the church. Let me introduce you to my pastor. Those are awesome. But I'm going to do my homework first. So I'm going to research what role they play. Is this a senior pastor? Is this an elder? Is this a missions and outreach director? Is this a lay leader? Or I'm meeting with an existing church ministry. Those are super fun because then they're already the boots on the ground and they know the channels. They know the inroads. And then I need to speak their language. Good guides use the language of kids and families, not necessarily foster care and adoption. Those are going to come later. So I want to speak a language that they already speak in the church. And most churches, if you would agree, most churches aren't speaking foster care. And they're not necessarily speaking adoption. And if you talk to a pastor, he might not even know how many foster and adoptive families are in his church. The next thing is if you're meeting with somebody on church staff, especially like a senior pastor, executive pastor, who again, we know that those are decision makers, so those are excellent meetings to have. But when I'm meeting with those people, I'm talking about their congregation and their community. Those two things, congregation and community. And so I'm asking strategic questions. So I'm listening to them and I'm having a conversation. In my mind, I tell myself with every meeting with a church as a good guide, this is a conversation, not a class. I am not wanting to drop an educational bomb on them because even if I've had pastors that I've met with that literally, like I explain what it's like to not grow up in a family. I explain what it's like to be moved around from foster home to foster home, or I've explained what it's like to grow up in an overseas orphanage. And there's been tears, there's been heart-wrenching pastoral moments where I'm getting to pray for pastors as God's breaking their heart, but it was too much. It was too much too soon. And at the beginning of this, I didn't always know my audience. And so being a good guide means they just need to know enough to ask another question and to want to follow up with you. And the last thing I'll say on this point is to go with something. When he says credibility, you need credibility. So you need something to leave behind after your meeting. So whatever your print material is, I've got examples of ours that you can take home, because we're all about sharing here. This is my one-pager for churches. I'm going to show you this a couple times because it exemplifies all 4 points. I had all 4 of your things on my one-pager. I like it. Anyways, that's what I will leave with a church. If I'm going in doing more, then I have this workbook. So they're coming in seeing me bring print material that shows my credibility without me having to brag. I can say that we've used this with other churches. We've done all of the things, just like Jason said, but I'm having something that is my credibility that is really, really helpful.
That's good. Awesome. So the big idea is that we shift our posture. It's more about the church and helping the church thrive and partnering with pastors and ministry leaders within a local church context and say, we want to come alongside you and help disciple your people, to deepen their faith and to give them opportunity to live that faith out wider. That's really 2 fundamental pillars of any church. I've yet to meet a pastor who would say, Jason, frankly, I really don't care if our people grow deeper in Jesus and live Jesus out further. Like, those are the 2 things. And in all the kind of rigmarole sometimes and all just the stuff, like it really boils down to those couple of things, right? And as an organization, we're able to come alongside them and say, we get it. And that's what we're all about as well. Okay? We want to help your church do that well. So principle number 2, shrinking the problem. The big idea here is this, that sometimes when the problem is really, really big and overwhelming, it makes people feel really, really small and incapable. And so how can we help them overcome that problem when they're confronted with an overwhelming problem? In 2004, some of you may be familiar with this, there was a study done at the Carnegie Mellon Institute called the Rokia study. And essentially it went like this. There's kind of, if you look online, there's like adapted variations of it, but this is essentially kind of how it went. Group 1 received a letter detailing a fictional character story named Rokia in her impoverished living conditions, a picture, and how a donation would impact her life. On average, people who donated roughly $2.38 a person, okay? Now, group number 2 received a letter detailing statistics and data on over 3 million people living in poverty in Africa. No stories, no Rokia, no pictures, just data. On average, those people donated less than half, okay? Now, other studies have come along that kind of confirm the findings of the Rokia study, but the big idea here is this, is that people are more compelled by stories, not overwhelming data that they don't understand, all right? So when confronted with overwhelming pieces of data, the natural human tendency is to step back and say, I don't understand, I don't get it, I don't know what to do about it, and so I'm not going to do anything about it. I will leave that to the experts. This requires us to shrink the problem. Shrinking the problem doesn't mean minimizing the problem. It doesn't mean pretending like the problem isn't a real problem. It doesn't mean kind of saying, you know, the problem's real big, but it's really not that big of a deal. No, it is a big deal, and it's a big enough deal that we want to shrink it down and bring it a little bit closer. The idea of decreasing distance and increasing proximity to the problem. When I am confronted with overwhelming data I don't understand, it's far away from me, and there's a huge gap between me and it. And I fill that gap with misconceptions, misperceptions, unfounded fears, and all the litany of reasons why I'm not capable of solving that problem. But when it's brought a little bit closer to me, I can see it for what it is, and I can't pretend like it doesn't exist anymore, okay? So if you were to come to me, so the Rokia study, a few findings. The story of one child was more compelling than the suffering of millions. When enabled to depersonalize a large group of people, human beings respond to them with far less compassion. Those are just numbers and data. And we get that in the foster care world. Every number is a name and a face and a real kid. But it's so hard sometimes to translate that into human form. And then third, sometimes the statistics that should mobilize us to action can actually be used to excuse our inaction. Now, we're not saying that data is not important. Data establishes the reality of the situation. It creates a baseline for us to operate from. So we're not suggesting that if you're in the foster care advocacy space that you never mention to a local church that there are over 400,000 kids in the system right now, or 100,000 waiting to be adopted. That establishes a baseline reality of the problem. But what we find is that that is not compelling. It might actually be paralyzing, and it might actually be counterproductive. And so a few principles that we can consider in terms of shrinking the problem, here's how it makes sense to me. Let's say that you came to me and said, Jason, I need you to help me lose weight. And I'd say, great, what do you eat every day? And you would say, well, I eat the #1 value meal at my favorite restaurant every day. And let's just call that Chick-fil-A, okay? Because that's actually what we're talking about. Chick-fil-A, #1 value meal, they make more money off the #1 value meal than all their other products, sum total combined. And that's like $1 gazillion on the #1 value meal, right? Those people are loaded, right?
It's holy chicken.
It's God's chicken, it's good. The irony is that the #1 value meal is one of the most unhealthy items on the menu. And some people come up to me after and they're like, thanks for ruining Chick-fil-A for me. And I'm like, I didn't ruin it, you're still gonna eat it. Because that's what we do. We discard data for the sake of our own personal satisfaction. Now, here's the problem. If I come to you and say, here's your problem, you eat 1,100 calories every day at lunch, or not even every day at lunch. In our little town, we have 6 Chick-fil-A's, and you drive by all of them at like 2:30 in the afternoon. It's not even mealtime, and it's wrapped around the building. Like, what are you people doing? Why are you eating at 2:30 in the afternoon, right? I'd say, stop doing that. And you'd say, I don't want to stop doing that. It tastes too good. And I'd say, but it's 1,100 calories. And you'd say, I don't even know what that means. Because, frankly, let's be honest. How many of you have held a calorie in your hand? How many of you have tasted one, smelled one, seen one, had a human interaction with one? Nobody. Nobody knows what a calorie is. My 13-year-old daughter the other day said, Daddy, what's a calorie? And I said, I don't know, sweetie, ask your mom, because nobody knows. There's just these things out there, and I tell you, there's 1,100 of them, and you go, I don't understand what that is, I don't understand what that means, and I'm going to discard that data for the sake of my own personal satisfaction. So let's shrink that problem down, and now here's where it gets real. 1,100 calories is the equivalent of eating 4 Snickers bars for lunch, okay? Now, just kind of socially, we understand that it's gross to eat 4 Snickers bars for lunch, right? I understand maybe 1 after lunch, maybe a rough day 2, but 4 as your meal is highly inappropriate, right? But on a calorie level, it's exactly what we're doing. So here's what we've effectively done, is we've effectively shrunk 1,100 things that you don't understand and have no human relation to and can't really relate to at all, to 4 things that everyone understands what that feels like. And we've simply brought it a little bit closer. And we've brought it so close that it's impossible for you to pretend like it's not real. It's very easy for us, especially in, let's just say, foster care world, where I live most of my time, to pretend like 400,000, those aren't real kids. I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't see them on a daily basis, although I probably do. I just don't know it, right? I just don't know that they're around. I don't have a human experience with that the way that I feel like I need to, so let's shrink that down to 4. This is the art of shrinking the problem. We're not minimizing the problem. We're simply stewarding the problem and well in terms of how we're communicating it to the audience that we're communicating to. This is the normal human reaction to overwhelming data. Whoa, never mind, right? We go, hey, pastor, we want to invite you to an info meeting where you can learn about foster care. And they're like, yeah, this sounds great. And they show up, and we just dump all kinds of stuff on them. I go, whoa, never mind, right? Or this is an informational meeting for potential foster parents, right? We're like, if you really want to love children and blah, blah, make a difference, and then they show up, and we're like, it's hard, and it's awful, and it's wonderful, and it's horrible, and it's beautiful. And they're like, whoa, never mind, right? I'm out of here, okay? That's what we're trying to avoid, that kind of reaction. The idea of decreasing distance. The goal isn't to minimize the magnitude of the problem, okay? We're simply providing a platform upon which the church can more easily see it, more clearly see themselves in the stories surrounding the problem, where we can approach them and say, your church excels in these areas. You're already doing such good work here, and here's how that fits into the story that we're communicating to you. And we want you to see yourself in that and more readily identify their role to solve it. This is the art of decreasing distance. 3 principles of problem shrinking, then I'll turn it over to Tiffany. Number 1 is hyper-contextualize your data. I don't know if your phone can read that QR, but there's a link there at the bottom. Maybe you can take a picture. The More Than Enough support team has recently released a data platform online where you can go and enter in your county, and it will pull up your county data right there in real time. Now, you might find that there's some categories missing, and it says, data is still needed, and that's where we need your help, okay? So go to your county after the session, right, when we're all done, and look at your county, and it'll give you real-time numbers of number of kids in care, number of kids removed, number of churches in your community, all kinds of data. And if there's any blanks there where it says we still need data, then help us, okay? There's a link on there. You can help. Hey, we want to help find this data to populate to this for you. Hyper-contextualize data, okay? What's going on within a 10-mile radius of their church, a 15-mile radius of their church? What's going on within their county? What are the real numbers that they need to know that are achievable, solvable, relatable? They're so close, we can't pretend like they're not real. Principle number 1, hyper-contextualize data. Number 2, identify real needs. Let's get a little honest in here. We've already been on. We're just going to keep on down that train, right? Let's get a little poignant, okay? Let's not use vulnerable children and families as service projects for churches to feel good about themselves, okay? Let's not say, hey, it's super easy. You can just collect some backpacks, and I'm not making fun of this, but I do know that we have heard agencies and DHS offices over and over again say, churches are amazing, they want to help, and they bring us backpacks or something like that, and then we stick them in the storage unit with the other 1,000 backpacks that we didn't use last. In some cases, that's a real thing, but the point is, are we meeting needs so that we can help churches feel good about meeting a need? Or are we actually identifying what's the real need here? Let's go to them and say, what do you need? We're not going to project on you what we want to do for you. We want to learn from you what you need most, and then we're going to go back and we're going to figure out how we can solve that problem for you. This helps shrink the problem, to really bring it down. You know, you guys know, it's with the church or with an individual, it's how do we address this massive monumental problem? Well, let's just start meeting some simple needs, because simple needs are significant and they mean a lot. And they start moving us a little bit closer in proximity. And then finally, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. How does collaboration help shrink the problem? Think of it this way. For the most part, our organizations and our church partnerships, and again, this is not for everyone, but we have a tendency to lean in this direction where our organization sits at the center of what looks like a bicycle wheel with several different spokes that come off of it. And those spokes are different churches. And those churches' primary connection or only connection to the mission is us. Okay? Now you'll notice that they're connected to us, but they're not connected to one another necessarily. And so what would it look like in your church partnership structure to begin to move towards not only churches being connected with you, but churches being connected with one another in a more collaborative, networking kind of way, where they can be sitting around the table and they can physically see we are not in this alone. The whole burden to solve this problem is not just on us. We can identify what we can do well. We can lean into the expertise of other churches and what they're doing well, and it helps shrink the problem for me. As a pastor, when I look around and I go, okay, I'm not in this alone. I can partner with you. We can do an A+ job here. You guys are doing an A+ job there. Maybe we all don't need our own foster pantries, or maybe we all don't need our own support groups, or maybe we all don't need our own informational meetings. What if we all kind of collaboratively began to do this, and we weren't concerned with whether or not someone might like another church's program a little bit better, right? That we just kind of let that go. Well, I don't want to send them to that support group at that church because that church is cooler than us and they might like it more, kind of thing, right? Now, what if we just began to say, let's lean into what you do well, lean into what we do well, collaborate together, and that helps shrink the problem for us a little bit. Hey, we're going to skip that. Yep, for the sake of time, we will skip that. This is a fun video about, and there's... Is there audio? Let's not skip it. Let's show it, and then we're going to turn it over to Tiffany. Can we get audio? There's a fun video about running into people unexpectedly and then realizing, you know, you got some weird people along with you. That's collaboration. We good?
Yeah. We'll do that. Well, just wait till we get there.
Ozzy,
Yeah.
look at that funny little truck.
Yeah. Cute, huh?
Oh, it's coming straight at us. We're gonna hit! We missed it.
Oh? You call that a miss? Well, I'm getting in your car.
You guys okay?
Why are you hopping up and down?
Because I'm hopping mad.
Guy's got a sense of humor.
Hey, why don't you join us?
Where are you going?
We're following our dream.
Really? I have a dream too.
Huh?
But you'll think it's stupid.
No, tell us.
Well, I want to go to Bombay, India and become a movie star.
You don't go to Bombay to become a movie star. You go where we're going, Hollywood.
Sure, if you want to do it the easy way.
We picked up a weirdo.
So that's collaboration. You're headed down the road doing what you do. You run into somebody, and you say, hey, why don't you join us? And then you look around and go, oh, these guys are weird, right? But let's be honest, maybe you're the weird one in the equation, right? So here's the truth about collaboration, is that you're going to interact with some weirdos, and you're going to interact with people who might do things differently than you. But here's the beauty of collaboration, and many of us have been in these rooms like this, where you walk in, and there are church leaders and ministry leaders from a community all gathered in a room together around a particular cause. Again, let's say it's caring for kids and families in our community. And you get to stand in front of them and say, how beautiful is this? Under what other circumstances would you guys be in the room together? outside of gathering around the cause of caring for kids and families. You know, you've got the most charismatic guy over here and the most like conservative guy over here, and that guy's theology couldn't be any more different than the way that that guy runs their services, and this lady over here couldn't think any more differently about a particular cause than this lady over here. And yet here we are in the room together because we're able to set some of those non-essentials aside for the sake of collaborating together to care for kids and families. All right, Tiffany.
How many of you, by a show of hands, are foster or adoptive parents? Excellent. Okay. Story is king when we are shrinking the problem. So when we can tell a story, and I would even encourage you to not just tell the story of the Rokia, the end person at the end, but to tell the story of somebody who met the need of that end kid or family. And when you do that, a lot of times, I learned story several years ago, and then I had this grappling with my own story because I have a relatively unique international adoption story that took 7 years to bring my kids home, and lots of complications and crazy trauma stories and human trafficking and all of that. I could tell you my story another time, but I knew that if I led with that story, it's the deep end story, right? Like nobody wants to, I wouldn't even tell anybody to do what I did. So I have to then blend my story with a whole bunch of other stories that I know. Stories of my best friend Becca, who takes in teen girls through foster care and then launches them into adulthood as they age out. She hasn't adopted one of them, she's launching them. I talk about my friend David, who does fundraising at a Christian university and just started a scholarship program for former foster youth. I talk about my friend Heidi, who's a CASA, or my friend Angie, who delivers meals on a regular basis. You want them to, we're talking about tier your on-ramps later, but you want them to experience stories that's shrinking it down to bite-sized pieces that they might cling on to one of those stories and you don't even know which one. So you're going to have a cluster of stories that you share. That's my first point. Shrinking numbers is great. Again, my infographic, like Jason said, we have the national numbers. We have our state numbers in California, and then my regional alliance covers 4 counties. And so I have my county numbers. I'm super excited for county-specific numbers because then we can shrink it even more. But I've shrunk it 3 levels. But I would encourage you to go the 4th level. Right underneath all of those levels, I always shrink the problem down to 1. And you've heard this if you've been to CAFO, or if you've heard Josh Shipp, or if you've read the Stanford study. It only takes 1 single, caring, loving adult to change the trajectory of any of those kids. So you're still shrinking it further down to 1 every time. I shrink it down to 1. And then I'll just share with you one story really quick. One of the pastors I met with wanted it shrunk down even more. He wanted his city. That data, even on the new resource, which I'm so excited about, county-specific data, I'm still not going to get probably city-specific data on that website. And so he was like, he saw all of these numbers. He really wanted to get involved. He's like, who are my neighbors immediately in my congregation and community? And I didn't have a number for him, but I could do better than that. I'm partnered with a nonprofit that literally is 2 miles away from his church, and they do normalcy activities for kids in foster care. So they scholarship sporting events and camps, summer camps. They do sporting equipment drives, and they have a clothing closet. So all of these things that just come alongside. So I literally just introduced the missions pastor and his 3 staff members to my friend Jody at Aspire Kids, and it was like love at first sight. They just finally had an outlet that was right next to their church, and they collected a huge moving van full of sports equipment and all of these things, and now they're just in conversation on how they can continue partnering with Jody. So he needed to just meet somebody.
Awesome. Very cool. Shrinking the problem, hyper-contextualizing data, helping sit across the table from church leaders and help them establish clear, actionable, simple goals. Give them easy wins, but also communicate that those easy wins, those simple things, are incredibly significant. They're not meaningless, but they also help bring them just a little bit closer to the problem, decrease distance, increase proximity, and get their feet wet a little bit, right? We just want to get you a little bit closer. Let's not talk about step 10 right now. Let's just talk about step 2, right? That's where we're at right now, okay? And we want to help you take those next best steps. Third principle, the idea of increasing clarity. One of my favorite books, favorite writers and favorite books, guys named Chip and Dan Heath, in their book Switch say this: sometimes what looks like resistance is often just a lack of clarity. And I love that, but I don't love it, right? Because that principle applies in all kinds of situations, including my parenting, right? And when I tell my kids to do something and I feel like they're being resistant, it's now kind of haunted me, and I go, maybe they're not actually being obnoxious kids. Maybe I'm just not being clear with them on what I'm expecting them to do. And so it begins to flip the burden. It flips the burden from, is it you being resistant and you just actually need to get your act together and start caring more? Or is it me not being very clear? And so as organizations, let's adopt this posture which begins to ask the question, in what ways might we not be being as clear as we would like to be with our churches? And is it possible that potential church partners in our communities aren't necessarily resistant to the idea of caring for vulnerable children and families, but it's just that maybe we haven't been as clear with them as we would like to be to help them understand how? How? Again, I've yet to meet a pastor who would sit down with me and say, Jason, I appreciate what you're saying, but I want to build a church that does not care about vulnerable people, right? And if I ever meet that pastor, guess what I do? I get up, I walk out, and I go to the church down the street, because there's plenty of others, okay? I've yet to meet that. So what would happen if we flipped our assumptions to increase clarity? So I remember when my dad taught me how to mow the yard, and you know my dad, which is weird, so you know who I'm talking about. I was probably 12 years old, and he said, Jason, it's time. It's time for what? It's time for you to do the yard forever. I'm never doing it again. Basically is how the conversation went. So he took me out there. What he didn't do is say, here's the yard, here's the mower, here's the stuff, go, right? No. I'm 42 years old. I would still be trying to figure out how to turn the mower. Who in their right mind would ever know you pull that little handle and you jerk it back as hard as you possibly can, and that actually turns the thing on? No, he actually had to show me step by step how to do it, okay? So I was probably a bit resistant as a 12-year-old, preteen to the idea of mowing the yard. I would have been exponentially more resistant had he simply said, do it, figure it out. Of course not. Instead, here I want to provide clarity for you on how to do it. For many of us, the question is not do churches care, but do churches know how to care? No one gets lost anymore. I travel a lot for work. A lot of you do as well. I'm not concerned when I get off the plane and get in the rental car where I'm going, because I have this little voice in my phone, Siri, that before I get to the intersection, she's already told me what to do when I get there. Okay? This is the idea of increasing clarity. That our churches are going to come up against some intersections, but our organization has provided the clarity that they need to know what to do long before they even get there. And that if they do get to that intersection and they've kind of got a freak out moment, they turn around, they lean into us and say, hey, you've been a good partner for us. Help us navigate through this. We're their little Siri voice in their brain. So, convincing or clarity, this is a couple of questions to ask. To what degree does a church even have a church in mind? In your community, does that church need convincing that caring for vulnerable children and families is a good thing? Or does that church simply need clarity on how to do it? Now, I am a full believer in the why, that we are clearly articulating why, through the gospel, this is something that Jesus very deeply cares about and that our churches can very clearly demonstrate in their communities and around the world. But I wonder if sometimes churches already have those questions answered. We don't need you to try to convince us anymore. What we need from you now is clarity. And I find that sometimes we are answering questions for churches that they're not asking anymore. Is there a problem? Yes, we already know. Does God care about this? Yes. We already know he does. Should our church do something about this? Yes, we're already on board with that. We're not asking those questions anymore. We don't need the convincing. We just need the clarity on how now. And so a good practice as an organization is to even sometimes work through your current church partnerships or potential church partnerships and say, hey, where is this church on that spectrum? Are they in need of kind of some why and a little bit of convincing, a little bit of education? Or are they simply in need of some clarity, and how can we help provide that? A few months ago, my wife wishes that she could live in a glass house, just as much sunlight as possible all the time, right? And we should probably move to Alaska during parts of the year where the sun never sets. That would be her dream. So we had a guy come over and talk to us about putting some skylights in different parts of our house. And he came over and he didn't spend any time telling us about the specifications of different skylights. He didn't sell us on the product. He simply walked in and started to really tell a story. I think he already knew that we were sold on the idea of skylights. So his job in that moment was not to convince us that we should want them. He knew that we wanted them. That's why he was there. His job was to help us understand that we're thinking correctly and it's going to work. And here's how much it's going to cost. So he told a story for about 30 minutes. And he walked around our house and he said, if you put one here, then at this time of the day, you could sit here and it's going to be like you're under the Shekinah glory. And my wife's going, yes, that's what I want, right? If you put one out on your back porch and it's going to bring light in back here, all day long, you can sit in this area and it's going to feel like you're outside, but with the benefits of AC inside. We live in Texas. And my wife's going, yes. And I'm going, dude, stop it, right? What's he doing? He's telling a compelling story. He's saying, here's what the happy ending looks like if you act on this.
How many skylights did you get?
We got 2.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't need to convince you that you want them. I just want to tell you a story of what it will look like when you have them, okay? That's the happy ending story that he shared with us. And you know what it did? Is that when he then told us how much they cost, it stung a little bit, but the story was too good. It helped us accept some of the costs that we would incur because that's the happy ending story that we want to live into, okay? All right. Elements of your story. What does success look like? We're helping define for our churches, here's what that happy ending story looks like. Here's what we're moving towards. The first is this: your story is not your history, okay? Your story is not your history. If you're familiar with Donald Miller, many of these principles are drawn from his story brain. He tells stories of looking at like plumbers' websites or AC guys' websites. And he says the only reason you go to a plumber's website is because you need a plumber like right now, right? And the 3 questions that you're asking is, how fast are you? How much do you cost? And can I trust you? What I don't want to do is go to your website, and the whole front of your website page talks about how in 1937 your great-grandfather started this company, and then your grandfather took it over, and then here's the history of our company, and then way down here is kind of how to get a hold of us. No, I need a plumber now, and I don't frankly really care about your history right now, okay? I need to see myself in your story, and the story that I need communicated to me is how fast are you, how much do you cost, and what can I trust you? Right? So our story is not necessarily our history. Our story of our organization is what it looks like when churches and us work together and we move towards this happy ending. What's the problem that we're trying to solve for our organization, for our churches? Like, what's the lead question that we're asking? What's the statement that we're giving? They come to our website, they see our collateral material, and they very quickly identify how we can help them overcome some of the hurdles that they're facing, okay? How does that problem make those churches feel, okay? This Skylight guy told stories. He made us feel like, yes, like this is going to be good. It's going to cost, but it's going to be good, right? How can you help them overcome that problem, and what will their ministry look like after the problem is solved? What is it feels like you're sitting outside, but with the benefits of AC inside story for churches, okay? There's going to be some costs, but as we work through this together, our story is your story, okay? We want to write this story with you because you are ultimately the main character. Let me end with this. Another principle of increasing clarity is very rarely do I go run. I actually don't enjoy running. I don't really enjoy people that enjoy running. I don't get you, right? Like, you're weird to me, you're strange. I don't get it. So my dad, midlife crisis, started running marathons. And then his last one, he crossed the finish line, collapsed in the medic tent and almost died. And my mom said, you're done. That's enough, right? Get over it, right? I don't get it. I don't understand it. But every once in a while, I'll go out and I'll run because I just feel like that's like a good 42-year-old suburban dad thing to do. I'm going to go for a jog. And I live with all females in my house, and I just need to go run somewhere sometimes, right? So it's about 3 miles to a round trip from my door to the main entrance of our neighborhood. And 3 miles to me, guys, like that's awful. A marathon. Sarah Norris over here, by the way, in quarantine, I think you ran 2 marathons, right? 1 on your treadmill at home, which is what? Like, who does that? So I don't understand her. 3 miles for me is a marathon. And here's the deal. When I think of the 3 miles, that's so far away. There's so much agony between where I am and where that is. I psych myself out. I don't want to do it. So here's the trick I've learned to play on myself. On that main road, there are light posts about every 80 to 100 yards along the way. So I've tricked myself into kind of operating with this thinking that I'm not running 3 miles. I'm running a series of 80 to 100-yard runs from light post to light post. And then when I get to the next light post, I can kind of celebrate. I made it to another. I don't stop and celebrate. But in my head, I go, hey, easy win. Here's another win under my belt. It develops momentum. It helps keep me going. And then cumulatively over time, these 80 to 100-yard runs add up to a 3-mile run. So let's paint that picture for our churches of what that 3-mile marker is. Here's where we're more than enough for kids and families. Now, that's daunting. And between where that is and where we are, that's a lot. But let's break it down and let's increase clarity. What's the next light post for you? And it can be as simple as we're going to do Stand Sunday next year. Or we want to begin to assemble some people in our church that care about this and just begin to learn from them. What's the next most strategic light post? And then once you get there, how are we celebrating and looking towards what the next light post is after that? All right, Tiffany.
I will share 2 things because clarity is key. I have lots and lots of stories here, but linking things to what the church is already doing allows them to come closer and bring clarity to this issue. So in terms of outreach ministries, if a church has an outreach ministry, but only a few, I would bet money on the fact that they probably have a homeless ministry and a prison ministry. Right? I mean, your church probably has those. I know that all the churches I've been in have had both of those 2 outreach ministries. If we come in trying to add something on, again, general asks with general information is generally no. But if we're linking it to something that the church already cares about, all of a sudden it's a game changer. So the clarity is that 90% of the homeless population grew up fatherless. And many of them grew up in the foster care system. 85% of youth in juvenile hall came out of the foster system or came out of broken homes. Again, you're shrinking the problem and bringing clarity to it because then you're realizing, hey, if you as a church and we as your guide came in and went upstream a little bit, wouldn't that be great? There might be less people in our prisons. There might be less homeless population in our community. You're linking it to something they already care about. If your church is not big on outreach ministries or it's a smaller church that does, it's more organic, people go out and do it, but it's not like an organized ministry, I can guarantee you they have a children's ministry. Talked about this in another session. I would often quote to churches, did you know that 50% of children, this is 2019 statistic from the National Survey of Children's Health, 50% of all children have experienced childhood trauma. So 50% of the children in your children's ministry at your church have experienced trauma. Because if you want to talk trauma, you need to actually make it tangible and clear to them that it's in their church already. And then they start to care about it because it's already within their 4 walls. I now tell churches as I'm engaging with them that number went from 50% to 100% because we just had COVID. And every single child lost something. Every single child had their life disrupted. Every single child doesn't have normal anymore. Their normal changed. So talk to them in those areas where they already care and then attach what you're doing to that. It's not this is truth, right? This is not just you're riding the coattails of something that's effective. What you need to do is just link it to something they already care about, and then you have their heart. So that's my first thing. And then whatever lane they pick, you have some options. It's like TBRI, right? In TBRI, you give 2 options that you like both of them. So if churches are really wanting next steps, we've got here's a list of 3 things, or this was the holidays, here's a list of 5 things. We've got very clear next steps, and then what do you want to pick? Just pick one. You are empowering them to choose, but you're giving them clear options, and then whatever they pick, it's almost like the magician who's got the hat and the prize or whatever you pick, he's got a response to it, or he's got the rabbit coming out. You then have the toolkit for that. You have the next steps for them. Have trainings. If they pick respite events, if they pick a support group, if they pick wraparound care, immediately say, and here's your toolkit.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah. And so on that, you make great points. 4 principles of increasing clarity. Number 1 Keep the church's vision out front. Like, what are they already aiming towards? What's their 3-mile marker in terms of the whole vision of their church? And how can we communicate to them, this isn't an aside to that, this isn't a sidestep, this isn't a diversion from that. Here's how it very beautifully and strategically fits into the things you're already doing. Flip your assumptions, okay? What if it's less about they don't care and it's more about they simply need clarity? Okay? It's not resistance, it's just lack of clarity. Present a simple plan, just like Tiffany just said. What's the next light post? And how does that fit best? What feels most right for your church right now? And then paint that happy ending picture. Here's where we're running together. So with that, we'll wrap up with the fourth principle real quickly here, the idea of tiering your on-ramps. Meet churches where they are and help them take their next best steps forward. It flows right from that idea of clarity, that maybe the clarity that churches need most is not so much even how to engage in the space that you're inviting them to, but also how does this fit into the culture and the rhythms and the values of our church already? Help us see how this fits into who we are. Then once we have that clarity, some of the other things will begin to take care of themselves. Okay? And then let's lay out a series of on-ramps for them on which they can engage to take their next best steps. Think of it like this: walk, jog, and sprint. I mean, it's just as simple. You can apply different names to these ideas, but the idea that some churches, what they need right now is someone to help them learn how to walk. Other churches might already be sprinting, okay? And so where are these churches on this paradigm, and what are the opportunities that we're putting in front of them that really help meet them where they are? And as we look at the different programs and the different features that our organization has, does there seem to be a balance between some of these lower hanging fruit, kind of mid-level commitment, and higher level commitment opportunities? And a good exercise is to look at your material and look at your programs and say, you know what? It seems that we kind of skew towards the really hard and high-level commitment. And maybe one of our barriers is giving churches an easy on-ramp to engage with us. And so how can we help fill that gap a little bit? Or maybe you're on the opposite end, you know? It feels like maybe we skew towards really helping churches know how to walk, but we're really struggling with helping them learn how to run and then start to sprint. And so what would it look like for us? Maybe we don't need to create anything. Maybe we just need to partner with somebody else that's already doing really good work in that space so that we can provide this holistic kind of balanced approach to how we're engaging churches. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about rank. It's not that walking is less important than sprinting. This is simply about roles, that some churches are in different places, and here's the best role that you can play right now, and it's significant. It's significant, okay? Now, very quickly, not long ago, I was in Kansas City, and I was at a large church, and they were hosting an appreciation dinner for foster families. And there were about 200 families in the room. And it was catered by a barbecue restaurant. And at the end of the night, this barbecue, the owner of the restaurant, who I didn't know was there, came up to me afterwards, and he says, hey, bud, and I love it when people call me bud. It's just my favorite thing in the world. But I'm not going to argue with this guy because just this huge, he smelled like a smoke pit, looked like a smoke pit, just one of those guys. And he said, hey, bud. And I'm like, yes, sir, right? What do you want? What do I do? And he said, hey, I own this restaurant, we cater. And he said, here's what he's probably late 60s, barbecue-sounding voice. And he said, hey, bud, we're not going to bring kids into our home. That's not where we're at, but I own the best barbecue restaurant in Kansas City. And if you're from Kansas City, that's a bold statement. And I'm like, we're from Texas. We can battle it out here, right? He said, I own the best barbecue restaurant in Kansas City. We've told churches, families, organizations in our city that anytime you have a foster family, bring a child in, or a function like this, let us know. We're going to be the first on their doorstep delivering the best barbecue in Kansas City for free. And what I'm not going to tell that guy is, that's great, but you should really bring kids into your home. Right? No. I'm going to say, dude, stay in your lane. That's perfect. And please don't ever bring kids into your home, bud, right? You'll terrify them, right? I would never say to him, that's wonderful that you're helping to provide meals and you're using your business that way, but if you really want to do something special and significant, you'll bring kids. Of course not. And so we need to identify what's the lane and how can they excel in that lane. Now, here's another cool part of that story. The church that was hosting that dinner was an old downtown, large, beautiful Baptist church, average age of membership, probably 103, right? 0 foster families in the church, okay? 0. But here's what they did have, a big, beautiful building and a lot of willing grandmas and grandpas who were serving tables that night to an average age audience somewhere between 30 and 40 years old, from churches all over the city. So here's a church that says, we know what we can't do, but we know what we can do. And what we can do, we're going to do really well. We would never say to that church, that's wonderful that you're opening your facility and serving families in your city like this, but if you really want to do something special, you guys will start bringing kids into your home. Of course not. Okay? So it's not about rank, it's about role and helping churches identify their sweet spot in that. There's two truths, and I found this, and I'll be real quick. Maybe we'll go 5 minutes over, okay? But we have a long break until the next thing, all right? How many of you are firstborn kids and your parents practiced on you and then they had other kids after, okay? So we were teaching our firstborn how to ride her bike and how to pedal, how to stay balanced, and how to do the whole thing. And then she finally got it and she took off. And then as she took off, we realized we forgot a very important part of teaching our kid how to ride a bike, how to stop. Right?
I did this with my adopted kid.
Yeah, there you go. We forgot to teach her how to stop. Crash and burn, awful, I'm never getting on a bike again, kind of thing. And then kid number 2, 3, and 4, we taught them how to stop. Sorry, kid number 1, right? And so here's what we realized is, man, she got it. She got overly zealous, excited. I'm doing it. And then she crashed and burned, okay? And so what we want to do is we want to really hold and balance these two tensions. That number one, the need is urgent. The need is urgent, and we want churches to learn how to ride the bike and get going. But we've got to balance that with that second truth, which is this. Our goal is sustainability, not speed. Our goal is that in the end, churches don't crash and burn, that we don't do more harm than we actually do help. And so we want to temper, and we want to strategize, and we want to help churches get a little bit closer, learn a little bit more, and then as they learn, do better with what they've learned, okay? We don't want to send churches hot and zealous and emotionally, fired up into environments with kids and families only to crash and burn, and then everybody loses in the end. So really balance that sense of urgency with that need for sustainability. Examples of on-ramps, the walk, jog, walk is low-hanging fruit opportunities. Jogging is slightly higher level commitment of resources and time. And you can fill these buckets with your own thing. And you look at your material and your program and say, how would we categorize the different opportunities that we have for churches to engage with our organization? And then the highest level commitments generally involves, for me, the most amount of training, okay? So that's things like fostering, adopting, CASA, respite, all these different things, right? Safe families, it's a really high level commitment. And that's good, it's okay. Now, what we don't want to do is undercut churches that feel like, hey, we're just walking, right? We want to have opportunities for them. But we also don't want to take away from churches that are ready to sprint and say, I know you're ready for that, but we just want you to kind of stay in this low-level lane. No, and it might not be, again, that we need to start all new programs. It might be that the solution is we partner with other people that can really help them start sprinting, okay? All right, a few disclaimers, and then Tiffany will close our time real quick. In the body of Christ, there are no insignificant parts. And so we're saying simple is significant. There is nothing insignificant about what you're doing. Number two, what's walking for one church might feel like sprinting for another and vice versa. So this isn't a prescription. It's simply us really learning and understanding the ethos and the culture and the rhythms of that church and what they have available. Your engagement strategy isn't about mobilizing an institution, and this is important. It can become very easy to depersonalize the church and view it as an entity and an institution that we want to mobilize as a partner and forget about the fact that we're actually helping the church pastor people, okay? We are in the stewardship business. We are in the discipleship business, and we're helping pastors and leaders pastor their people. One of the ways that we can do that is by sharing a diversity of stories. What does that mean? It means that we are sharing these stories where other people can see themselves in those stories that represent our different on-ramps. Generally speaking, we say everyone can do something, and the barbecue guy is important. Now watch this story of a family that's bringing children into their home. And those stories need to be shared. It's a couple on a couch interviewing, B-roll of kids playing in the background. Maybe they're making lunches before school. It ends with the family walking through a wheat field at dusk at night, and there's a barn in the background. Beautiful, wonderful stories, okay? But let's also tell stories of the barbecue guy. Let's tell stories of the downtown Kansas City Baptist Church and how they're opening that, right? Let's tell stories that represent the different on-ramps so that people can see themselves in that story and say, yes, I see myself there. We can do that, And let's communicate those kinds of stories to the churches that we're working with. So Tiffany, if you'll close us out.
Absolutely. I strongly encourage you to go home, get on a whiteboard with your team, and I'm going to give you actually 3 filters. We want the walk. I really like walk, jog, sprint. Before Jason had come up with this, it was crawl, walk, and run for our organization, but I don't think anybody's like, yep, I want to crawl. Like, I like yours better. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Yeah. Thank you for the clarity. In addition to those tiered on-ramps, I also want you to think through ages. I want a church engaged from children's ministry to retired ministry. So you need everyone at the church having an opportunity. And then the last thing I want you to add to your filter is what activities is the church already doing? What are they doing? So I'm going to give you examples in the walk, jog, sprint, and I'm also going to give you examples that are different age brackets and different things that I've infused into the culture of that church, but I can only do that if what? I've asked the right questions, and I know what their culture is, and I know what they're already doing and what ministries they have and what their service looks like at that church. So in Walk, there is an amazing church in our area that's like a mega church. They have like 6 campuses. It's like big, big, big for California. It's not Texas big, but it's big for California. So they have probably 10,000, not 27,000 people. But they do a serve day where they mobilize literally like over 8,000 people in one day. We just partnered with them the last 2 years to make sure multiple service projects were for vulnerable kids. So we're using and leveraging what they're already doing, and we're just inserting this into the equation. Next, there's another group that says we want to love this part of the highway. And not like highway service cleanup projects. We just want to love on organizations and families and ministries along that. We, again, infused different projects. We knew what our members, which ones of our member organizations were serving vulnerable kids along their freeway. We just connected them, did the introductions. VBS, I've had multiple opportunities to engage VBS kids in serving by doing the teddy bear or the backpack drives. That's their admission to coming to VBS. And if you can get lucky enough to be a guest speaker at their VBS, you talk about loving kids that don't look like them, or talking about being kind and gentle in their classroom. It's amazing because that makes those safer places for foster and adoptive youth when they go to school. And then the last one on Walk, women's Bible studies. Oh man, if that's your secret sauce, if you take away nothing, women's Bible studies, they pack baskets, they do encouraging notes, they send Starbucks gift cards. You can encourage them to support foster parents. You can encourage them to support foster kids. You can encourage them to support social workers. They're already meeting together and they love to be generous. So women's ministry groups, huge walk step. For jog steps, respite is huge for families. And so training groups to do respite, we just downloaded a full toolkit and did a full training. And so there's now 3 churches in the last 2 months in our region that are going to do quarterly respite. So now there's at least different places in our community, and so we're training them, and so they're doing that, which is really exciting. Another one is young adults. We don't want to miss the young adults. They're not ready for family recruitment or any of those things for taking in children yet. They're still learning to adult, but they are fabulous at room makeovers. Engaging them with a foster, like you have those visitation rooms where you're like, this is a yucky, smelly place. There's nothing to play with. It's not even exciting. This group went all like extreme makeover visitation room edition. Like they researched the color of the paint and what emotions that would elicit. They did a book drive and a toy. I mean, they really went above and beyond and made over this visitation room. That was something that took months to plan. So it's definitely in that jog category, but it didn't really require much training other than how to decorate a room that would be inviting. And we engaged young adults. And then the sprint step. Obviously, we know sprinting is the foster care and adoptive family. So what do churches do? Churches have rooms and churches have resources. So it's bringing them up and honoring them maybe the same way you honor baby dedications and dedicating families that way, or delivering adoption support checks in front of your congregation. So you're saying that that's normal. It's housing the support group meetings. Like Jason said, we have a group that has no foster adoptive families in that church, and yet they house a support group at that church. And then last one I'll say, because we can't forget men's ministry, but having a conversation with your men's ministry group about mentoring. These are fatherless kids that really need a positive male role model in their life. And if you can mobilize them, this is a walk along. This is between the jog and sprint category. They might not be taken in any kids, but man, if you can engage the older population and especially the men in your church to do this, this is huge. So those are my examples.
Awesome. Yeah, we know it's been a lot. It's a fire hydrant. Thanks for hanging with us a few minutes. Here's the encouragement, is to just go and sit with your team and start looking through your material and your communication and the things that you offer, and really begin to ask some honest questions about how we are coming alongside churches and saying, we are here to serve and support you. And then here's all the things we have in place that really prove that over time, that we can ultimately build sustainable, trust-based relationships with these churches and help them be connected to each other as well. So we're here to help in any way that we can. If you want to grab the booklet online, there's some questions that you can walk through for each of these sections. Thank you for being here. This week's been awesome. It's so good to be with you. Now we got to get out of the room. All right, thank you.
And I'll have a bunch of my print material, but I'm going to put it out there so we can clear out of the room. So if you want a whole bunch of print material, come grab it.